So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today's Friday, February the 11th, and this is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers, episode number 146. Today it's 44 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so it's melting off nicely, which is 7 degrees Celsius. My name's Frederick Dunn, and this is the way to be. So I'm really glad that you're here, that you're spending your time with me to learn a little bit about backyard beekeeping. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description below, and you're going to see everything, including important links to other videos and things like that. So we have a lot to go into today. What else? Oh yeah, by the way, Valentine's Day is coming right up, so if this catches you off guard, you better get off the internet right now or go order flowers or something for your significant other. It's going to be very important. It's an opportunity for profound letdowns. And if you have no Valentine, I have 2 single sons. Just kidding. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't call them out. Okay, so first question is from Heather Saltis, Taylorsville, Utah. I have fruit trees and will be starting a fairly large garden, and I'm sure my bees will forage, but my trees have unwanted pests like worms that eat the fruit and destroy it. Is there a safe way to get rid of unwanted pests that is safe for the bees? Thank you. There are 2 questions along this line that I received today. So there are a lot of issues regarding interactions with your honeybees and pest control. And it just stands to reason that because a lot of the pests for your fruit-bearing trees are insects, that the pesticides associated with those will also impact your honeybees. So it's a complex area to get into. So I'm going to provide a link. So please go down in the video description, look at the link that's associated with this question. There's a study that shows the impact. Unfortunately, your bees are going to be impacted if they're on the flowers at the same time that you assign pesticides to the trees. Some trees have systemic pesticides in them. All kinds of fruit-bearing trees have different methods of control and different pests associated with them, so it's complicated, much more than I can go into here. So for that one, please look at the description and you'll find out more, and you can read an extensive study. Probably the big concern is whether or not the honey that comes from those trees after they're treated with pesticide could impact the people that consume the honey. So the good news of that is all the studies that I looked into, that was part of the pesticide parameter, was that it not be in concentrations that could be harmful to people, both if they eat the fruit later on, because remember, this is before the fruit has produced on the trees, but also concerns about the pollen that the bees bring back, the nectar that the bees bring back, and then it ends up in the honey. Would that be detrimental to humans who consume the honey? And supposedly it is not. But I will let you know that on my property, all of my fruit-bearing trees, from, well, not just trees either, but elderberries, raspberries, apples, pears, the nut trees, and everything else get no treatments. But I'll talk a little bit about that more later. Question number 2 comes from Chuck Kyle, Akron, Ohio. Last week you spoke of a physical barrier called the queen excluder entrance blocker for the queen to stay long enough to lay eggs in frames and give workers time to produce comb. Now that's relevant to hiving either a package so that they don't abscond, or when you first hive a swarm of bees because they're brand new and it might be a brand new hive box that you've put them in. So this helps keep them in the hive until they feel committed. And how do they get committed? Well, they build infrastructure, so they're building comb and so on, but once the queen starts to lay and there's brood in there, after the eggs are in the cells for 3 days, they hatch out, they release a pheromone that commits the nurse bees to caring for those larvae. That's when you can take that off. So then the question is, can I use this barrier to prevent the hive from swarming? If the queens can't get out, the hive won't swarm. Can I leave it on permanently? You could leave it on permanently, but it's a bad idea, and I'll explain why. Because if you left it on for an extended period of time, drones can't get through this, for example. You need your drones, which are the male bees, genetics of your colony, to get out there and go to those drone congregation areas. This would block them from going through. The other thing is, if the conditions inside your hive are poor and the bees decide to abscond, they'll be stressed. by the queen not being able to leave. They'll start to congregate outside trying to get the queen to leave, and she won't be able to get out. On the flip side of that, when the queen is no longer in lay, because sometimes when they're getting ready for a swarm, the existing queen, they cut down on her food resources. They start exercising the queen. The nurse bees start chasing her around to get her to lose weight. What happens when she loses weight? She gets smaller. What happens when she gets smaller? She has the potential to actually fit through the queen excluder bars. So it's not unheard of that queens, either thinned down in preparation for flying, could get through that. But worse than that, sometimes you have a swarm that you've collected, and the queen that might have been with that swarm could be not mated. So if she's unmated, then she might be small and thin, which is also sometimes why it's hard to spot them on your brood frames. And an unmated queen could feasibly also get through those bars. So that's why I don't recommend leaving it on long term. Once they have brood, they're committed. They're not going to leave. Pull it off, give them full access to and from the apiary, the actual hive, so that they don't feel trapped and stressed. We don't want them to go nuts in there. We also don't want to trap if they're trying to chase an old queen out, they'll be producing those queen cells ahead of time in swarm preparation. And we don't want those new virgin queens to hatch out with the resident fertile queen, the laying queen, trapped inside the hive. Usually she departs before those replacement queens even hatch out at all. So the other end is we don't want conflict between the queens. Question number 3. Heather Saltis. My first colony of bees is coming in April. And this is another question about fruit trees. I have a few fruit trees and plan on planting a fairly large garden. I'm sure my bees will be all over my fruit trees, which I'm looking forward to. My question is there a way to keep the fruit tree from unwanted pests like worms, but safe for the bees? Just as I mentioned in the very first question, pesticides are pesticides. Fungicides can impact your bees. Herbicides can impact the bees, but pesticides for sure are designed to take out insects, and your bees are insects. So here's what I do. I increase the wild bird population. I realize though I'm not a fruit seller, so I don't produce apples. We have over 35 apple trees. I don't produce those to sell, or we're not processing apple cider or anything like that. I eat the apples while I mow the lawn and things like that. The deer eat them. But if you've got a healthy wasp population, and I know that this is contrary to what a lot of people want for their bees, but wasps and hornets also are valuable as far as pest control. I've watched yellow jacket wasps fly in, and other species of wasp as well, and they fly away with the worms that they catch on the trees. So that's pest control. There are also birds, so we have a big diversity of wild birds here. In the opening, hopefully I showed my turkeys and things like that have been coming near the house this time of year. And they eat all the bugs too. So we have nuthatches, titmice, we have woodpeckers, hairy and downy woodpeckers, we have the pileated woodpecker. So we have all of these other birds that are wonderful pest control. So in my opinion, again, I'm not in the business of producing fruit, but if it's for yourself, you can kind of boost the things that feed on the pests that actually attack your fruit-bearing trees. We have cherry trees also. The birds are my number one thing for cherry trees, so I couldn't do anything to stop that. But so look at natural things and produce more than you need, and then you'll get plenty. One of my favorites are mulberry trees too. Huge mulberries on those things. So again, we haven't treated them, and we collect bushels, not bushels. Pints, quarts, gallons, of mulberries, and they're ever bearing like all through the summer. So you can produce plenty of fruits and stuff without treating and still not be concerned then about your bees. And your fruits and nuts and vegetables, we have hazelnuts, we have walnuts, and because of the honeybees, I'm assuming those things are boosted. So you'll get more. I wouldn't treat at all. So, good with the bad, if you end up treating, you know who I would check in with on that, because he seems to have orchards? Vino Farm. See what he treats with, see what the impact is on the bees. And of course, the time of day that you treat, early mornings, late in the evening. So if you can get out there and spray those trees overnight, if you have to do it, then the bees aren't foraging yet. So you do those treatments in times when the bees are not actively foraging. If you have to treat, absolutely, then I would pick a time when your foragers, when your bees have a lower impact. Okay, so question number 4 comes from Joe Elam from Powder Springs, Georgia. What's your opinion on the use of EcoWood products on new wooden frames at the same time as you use it on newly built wooden boxes? I have both ready to finish and was going to dunk the hive boxes and bottom boards. Thanks, Joe Elam. So here's the thing, I already answered Joe's question because it sounded like he was mid-project there and probably wanted to get things going. The question is about the frames, the wooden frames, and do you want to... Here's a standard deep Langstroth wooden frame. They come untreated, unfinished, and that's the way I recommend you leave them. Because the bees are going to eventually put wax all over them, and of course they're going to build their comb on them and everything else, and this would be considered foundationless. And my bees naturally build their comb down from the top, and I don't prime them. Some people do. They prime it with wax, nothing wrong with that, or they put a little wooden starter strip in here, and then they start them that way. But EcoWood, if you want to know more about it, I'm going to put a link down in the video description because I've used it on almost all of my new hive boxes. It's a mineral-based wood finish, and you just dip them. It's as wet as water, so it soaks into everything. And it's supposed to last more than 20 years. So this is my 2nd year with it. I like it so far, but no reason to put any kind of wood sealer or treatment on these frames because after all, they're sheltered inside the hive. And the bees are going to take care of them. So, and he already went ahead because I answered him again right away because I didn't want him to be waiting for today's answer on that. But the interior surfaces of your hives don't require treatment. The bees will take care of that themselves pretty darn well. Question number 5. This is an old question, and I've been slow and lazy and doing this stuff. It's from Mark, Worcester, Ohio, and it says, I'm starting my 3rd year of beekeeping. Great, this is the year most new beekeepers don't make it past their 2nd year, so you're ahead of the game statistically. I use all medium Langstroth boxes. I'm going to build a long Lang hive to try out this year. So if you don't know, there's the Langstroth vertical hive boxes, which are the industry standard all over the United States, pretty much. And the long Lang just uses that Langstroth frame that I just showed you, and it's configured around that, but it's horizontal, so they're all side by side, no boxes to stack. I'm going to give you a link so you can see what that hive looks like. But I plan on moving my medium frame nuke colony into this hive. You seem to prefer deep frames, but what are your thoughts on using only medium frames for the long Lang? I know I will have to adjust the dimensions for medium frames, but are you willing to share your plans and any modifications for the long Lang you constructed? And I put that off for years because I wanted to see if it was going to work out, but I've decided on my final dimensions for my long Langstroth hive, and it's going to appear. Those plans will be free to you on my website, which is thewaytobee.org, and that'll be down in the video description. The link is there, or you can Google search it, go right to it. And there's going to be a page, and I think I already have a page, Horizontal Hives. And if I don't, there will be soon. So by next Friday, mark my words, that's why I'm saying it right now, because this is going to motivate myself to make sure and do it. I'm going to draw out all the plans with everything I've learned about my horizontal hive configuration, and there are many other options to go with. Just like mentioned here, the medium frames. Some people have made deep frames for the beginning, so here's the entrance. Deep frames go along, the standard Langstroth deeps, and then for the last third of it, they went to mediums. So the box bumps up and extends out. I saw this at the Hive Life conference with a horizontal hive seller there. And he had those medium frames, and that was so that they would fill those with honey, and then that would be honey that you pull off. So, but I do like the deeper frames because we want to concentrate more of the brood towards the entrance, and then I want those deep frames nearby because the more they travel up through the frames, the easier it is for the bees to winter. But if you're in a less extreme wintering environment, you could probably get away with the medium frames. And one of the things that I use as a guide for that is when I look at people like Dirt Rooster, Randy, Mr. Ed, which is Jeff Horchoff, and when we see those guys, or Yappy the Bee Man, when they cut into these homes and these old abandoned buildings and things like that, we see what the bees are doing and how they're using the space they're in. A lot of those floor joist bees hives have been built through there. So if we have a 2x10, that's not even 10 inches top to bottom. And in some of the walls, now we're talking 3.5 inches, but then of course they go very tall. But they they demonstrate that they can work in shallower openings and cavities and things like that, and then they'll continue to use it. So you could do that, but I think we're ahead if we use the deep frames. But if you're already using mediums and you want to stick with that and you want to try it out, it never hurts to try it out because your climate might be different than mine. I see the added depth as an advantage. But this locks me in. I'm going to post the plans because I have made my final modifications, and my next long Langstroth hive that I build for myself will be following my new design plans based on what the bees have demonstrated to me that they prefer as far as interior space. And also it will facilitate feeding the bees in winter if I need to for emergency situations. A lot of horizontal hive configurations do not make any allowance for feeding your bees in winter other than frame feeders, which I don't like the frame feeders because they're locked into a specific position. If we can feed over the top, then we get to move that along the horizontal hive configuration, and I have several holes across the top spread out, so depending on where the cluster is, we can do emergency feeding directly over it by removing one of the cover board holes and putting the feed directly over that and over the cluster so they don't have to move to get to it, which often they don't, and it's usually frustrating, and the bees can starve to death. So by next Friday, plans free. Use them, or take what I've done and maybe change it up a little bit and build your own designed off of that. It's not the only way to be. Question number 6. This is from Steve from Davidsonville, Maryland. Davidsonville. Going into my 3rd year, so a lot of 3rd-year beekeepers. That's good news. Overwintering 3 hives in 10-frame double deeps. Last spring, swarms got the better of me, and I have only been able to get about 12 honey super frames drawn out. I have plenty of plastic foundation, medium frames, but need to get them drawn out. What are your top 2 to 3 suggestions to get them drawn out? So part of the problem is with the question, plastic, foundation, medium frames. So my first question, let's say we're sitting down and we're having coffee. We're talking about bees and the problems we're facing. I need my bees to draw out more comb. What should I do? So we've got these frames that are partially drawn. What are the frames? Right now there are 2 plastic foundations that I recommend. And why do I recommend them? Well, one of them I've not tested, but it looks suspiciously similar to the one that's been my most successful frame foundation in the past. So in my past, the most successful frames are Acorns. Why? Because they're heavy wax. They were one of the first companies to put out heavy waxed plastic foundation that did not deflect or deform or flex or break with brittle material. So the combination of material and the heavy wax made them most appealing to the bees while they're drawing out new comb. So for those of you who don't know, when you buy your plastic foundation, and you can get it either as a complete plastic frame or you can get it as wooden foundation and stick the plastic in it, then your bees will build out from that. And there's a bunch of different companies out there. Man Lake makes some. Pierco, I started years ago with Pierco. Back in 2008, I had Pierco frames. And one of their engineers, one of their plastic designers, splintered off from Pierco and started his own company, and it was called Acorn. And Pierco was decent. They had some wax coating on them, but the deeper frames would flex and sometimes deform a little bit and stay that way. And I noticed that the Acorn frames did not do that. And then the Acorn company started offering different levels of wax dipping, single layer, double layer, or triple. So then we found out the more wax you put on the plastic, the better the bees will use it. Then comes along Premier, and they make a foundation. They don't make the one-piece frames, but the foundation that inserts into the wooden frames like the one I just showed you. It's also heavy wax coated. They smell the same. They smell like real beeswax. They also oxidize the way real beeswax does. It's called the bloom. When you see it on beeswax and you get this like a chalky surface on there, pretty good indicator that that's real beeswax. So that's number one, heavy waxed plastic foundation. And those are the two I recommend, Premier, Acorn. The choice is yours. The other thing that they need, a constant source of carbohydrate that they can use so that those wax-building bees, which are senior bees inside the hive before they go to outside chores, they are the wax builders, and they have little wax glands on their stomachs. There are 4 on each side, and then you'll see little wax shingles coming off, and then they pull those off when they produce them, and then they bring them up to their mandibles, and they work them in, and they go ahead and manufacture new comb with that wax. So they have to have a food resource that's constantly available for them to do that. That's why 1-to-1 sugar syrup, if you're going to augment that, if there's not a big nectar flow going on, then you can make sure that their wax production continues by providing that. And you can provide that on the top of your hive, whatever your favorite feeder is in spring. Now keep in mind, this is early spring, and not doing this in midwinter, trying to kick them off. We're going to do it because we need the warm temperatures too. Because the bees need a warm environment inside the hive in order to have the temperatures necessary for them to process the wax. So in general, high 70s, low 80s inside the hive where they're doing the wax building. They have to be inspired to build new comb, new infrastructure. What's the source of their inspiration? A queen that's in lay. And also new larvae that are actually, so once the eggs hatch and start to release those pheromones, then the nurse bees kick in and start feeding those. So that alters the pheromones throughout the hive. So now they know they have new bees coming, so they're inspired to expand the infrastructure. So in other words, if there's no larvae present, if the queen is infertile or nothing is going on yet, there's no inspiration for them to build new infrastructure, new comb, and draw it out. So that's another thing. You have to have the boxes inside your hive, not the boxes inside the hive, but the boxes composing your hive, they're sized right for the population of the bees. In other words, if you just put in a package of bees and they're occupying 4 out of 10 frames of your deep box, don't add a whole bunch of supers on right away. Because if we keep it closed down until they start to fill out those adjacent frames, they can also keep it warmer in there. As they spread out, they won't need to stay clustered, and they'll also expand and take care of those areas that need more cells for them to put resources in. So then when they have 8 or 9 out of 10 of those filled, that's when you put a medium super on with your heavy wax foundation, and those will be the ones that they draw out the fastest. So then there has to also be pollen resources coming in. So they do this in response to what the environment is providing, nectar and pollen. So now you can also, for a very short period of time, you can make pollen available outside as a pollen substitute. So things like Ultra B. We're going to talk about that a little bit later because there's another question coming up. But so they need all the food. So the proteins for the brood, the carbohydrates, which is the syrup, they need the wax foundation, and they need appropriate temperatures. And the reason why you want to keep that syrup feeding and constantly available is because in spring buildup periods, you can run into roadblocks when the weather, you might get a rain system that comes through that continues for 3 or 4 days, where they could be building new comb inside there, and they may still try to do that with the resources that they have in stored honey. But that's no guarantee, because they often, when they just have stored honey, don't consider that enough to go ahead and make new infrastructure. So they need to have nectar that's available in your feeder so that they can continue to build new comb. So just make sure, because if they have it and don't use it, don't need it, fine, they had it, they made the choice. But if they don't have that food resource in there, then you might have held them back a little bit. The other thing is, for those that are new to beekeeping, having nucleus-sized hives and starting nucleus colonies. Have them set up so that you can catch swarms and things like that. And then Those are standard 5-frame boxes, but then you can double decker those and have 5 frames up above. So once that 5-frame lower nucleus box builds up, because this is, remember, an auxiliary resource, not your main hive, you put those frames up above, and I recommend deep frames. This little colony of bees will serve to draw out comb and provide additional resources for other colonies that you might need later on. Because it's deep, it's obviously for brood boxes. Some people do double deeps and things like that. So just many ways to do it, but those are the things that have to be met. And those are the 2 companies right now that I recommend for plastic foundation, heavy waxed. Question number 7, David Love. Being a beekeeper, I'm always telling friends and family about how good it is to have and look after bees. Problem is, they don't have the same feelings about bees as me. I lose them after a short time talking about how super bees are. Would you have interesting details about bees I can use to get non-bee people listening to all that is great about these wonderful bees we're lucky to look after? Okay, so this comes into play, and that's a very interesting question because it has no definite answer. But my personality is like this. When people show up on our property, because I'm also a portrait photographer, so people show up seeing your pictures, engagement couples, maybe they bring a pet over or something like that, but especially when they bring kids with them. It's an opportunity to introduce people to honeybees. And it's amazing what they don't know. So the first thing, of course, I ask people before they even come to my property, because there's an apiary here, 20 colonies of bees, that's quite a lot for some people, kind of shocking. I ask them, is anyone here allergic to bees? And do you already know if you're allergic or not? That's number 1, because we don't want to take a chance that somebody has a bad experience with bees, gets stung by one, and goes into anaphylaxis or has some kind of allergic reaction and ruins them forever with bees. So then the other thing is that you guys know what honeybees are. Have you ever seen honeybees up close? Do you want to come and look at some honeybees? And then they don't know what you're talking about, but they look almost interested, like, is he making this up? Are there really honeybees here? And then I walk them right over to the apiary, which is only about 50 feet from the parking area. And it's fun because people will trust you, depending on your personality. For some reason, people trust me. I don't know if they should all the time. But it's an opportunity to provide their first experience with bees. So we take them into the bee yard and you stand at the edge of it. And nobody has a veil on, nobody has anything, because we're not doing anything with the bees, we're just looking at them. And I'm only going to walk them out there during times of plenty. So there's a nectar flow on. Come over here, stand downwind, smell the air, smell all that honey. Oh my gosh, the bees are making it. Did you know that? And so you're creating these first experiences for those people, and your personality plays heavy. How excited are you about the bees you have? What do you know about them? Did you guys know that when bees fly through the air, their hair has split ends? I mean, like your hair right now looks awesome. Don't tell people that their hair looks like it has split ends. But how much would you hate having split ends? Notice how when your hair has split ends, it's kind of frizzy? Let's go jump on the trampoline. Watch little kids when they jump on the trampoline and their hair gets all statically and they look like little dandelions about ready to lose their seeds. That's right. It's pretty funny. And you see, did you know that happens to bees? They're like, nah, does it really? Yeah, it does. When they fly through the air, those split ends on their hairs generate a static charge. And when they land on a flower, what happens? The anthers of that flower have pollen on them, and the pollen jumps to those statically charged hairs on the bee's body. And then the bee has to sweep it all back, and that's how they make pollen. And then you walk them over and say, look at these bees landing on this landing board. Look at the pollen pants on those people. And then they think it's pretty funny because now we tied in an experience, we made it related to people, and the honeybees have fuzz, which also makes them appealing to people. A lot of people think wasps and hornets, they call them bees. So now it's your opportunity to say, that's a wasp over there, look at it, no hair. Bees are like vegan wasps, so we have to make it relevant to the people, you know. So how far do you think that bee went to get that pollen that's right there? Let's go out in the yard and let's look for bees, especially with kids. This is a lot of fun. Let's look for bees. Where do we find them? Stand right here and listen. Do you hear that? You listen to a fruit tree in spring, and there's a hum because there's so many bees working on it, and people get scared, want to get stung. No, they're feeding. Do people get in fights at Walmart? No, let's skip over that. Do people get defensive of their own property when they're out at a store? I mean, do you go to a store and walk in there and lock all the doors so nobody else gets to go to the store? No, you're social at the store. You let other people go shopping too. But then when you get home, you lock your doors and you defend the resources that you have. So that's what the hive is. But right now, they're out here at the store. They don't care. They're sociable. They're opening doors for one another. They're sharing blossoms, and they're all over. They're not going to sting you. So that lets you bring people right up and get really close to bees. And then when they realize that they don't even care that they're there, now we have an opportunity to appreciate what the bees are doing. That blossom that they're on right now is later going to turn into fruit because the bee was there. So it's how you present it. And you'll find out that information, that knowledge can often defeat fears, because fears are irrational. Sometimes that fear is based on an experience they had as a child. Blame everything on wasps, not bees. Did you get stung walking across your yard when you were a child? Oh, that was a wasp for sure. That was not a honeybee. Although it likely could have been a honeybee because they would be on the dandelions in spring and things like that. But then you find out, especially little kids, you can catch a drone and come over and have them hold their hand out. Get ready to close your hand. Trust me. And you put the drone in their hand and they catch it and there's a bee in their hand. This is an experience that they're going to carry with them the rest of their life, depending on what they have to compare it to. But if it's the first time they held a bee in their hand, and because it's a drone, it cannot bite, it cannot sting, and then you open your hand up and it flies away, that child had an experience that's going to alter the way they perceive bees in general. So make their first experiences informative, relaxing, because let's be honest, there are some people that panic, that tense up. You can read their body language. They're haters. You're never going to get them out in a bee yard. And you know what? You don't want them in your bee yard. If they're haters, they're not worth winning over in the first place. I used to talk about bees and chickens, and somebody actually offered me money not to talk about chickens in the teacher's lounge. And I was like, keep your money. I'm talking about chickens. So it's the same with bees. It's what their experience is with them. But if you know a bunch of bee facts, it makes it more interesting because now you seem knowledgeable. You seem confident. You don't walk out there and go, see how harmless they are, then you take a sting to your cheek, so that just made a liar out of you. So you need to know what's going on and make sure that things are good. Do you believe that knowledge about every living thing will defeat your fears or make you start to like or appreciate something? Because I'm about to give you an example. We're going the long way around the barn on this one. We have 4 kids. And the rule was the kids could have any pet that they want as long as it's sold in a pet store. As long as they understood and could explain all the requirements for that pet to live, and they knew what it ate, they knew how it had to be housed, and everything else, we would say, you can have that pet. If you have kids right now, don't make that mistake. The oldest boy, James, we call the boys the J Bros because all the names begin with J's. James was doing research on tarantulas. That's right. Not my favorite pet. I didn't want one of those around. But because he read all these books, he was like 12, 11, and he told me all these facts about tarantulas. He knew what kind of habitat they had to have. He knows what they eat. He knows what their risks are. No more dangerous than a bee sting if they bite you and things like that. And so, yeah, he ticked all the boxes. He understood how to keep a tarantula. And then one day I took him to Little Caesars for pizza. And the pizza was going to take, 15 minutes. And 2 doors down from Little Caesars, there's a pet shop. And he goes, let's go look at the pets, Dad. So sure, no problem. Let's go down there. Let's check out the pets. I like seeing pets. We go in there. He runs in there. He starts checking out the aisles. He comes running back out of one of the aisles. He goes, they have tarantulas, Dad. I want to get one. There's nobody else in that store, just the guy behind the counter, James and myself. I go over there, I see this tarantula, thing's about that big, all hairy, big rosy-kneed tarantula. And he already knows off the top of his head, for it to be that big, that tarantula is probably 10 or 11 years old already, and it's only $27 or something like that. So, you got to keep your word when it comes to kids. So we go talk to the guy behind the counter. He's not very interested in the tarantula. And so James is like, yeah, I want to buy that tarantula. I said, okay, that's your tarantula. Let's go get it. Guy gets on the phone. He's like, oh, man, there's a kid here he's talking about. I'm not picking that thing up. And he goes, okay, I'm going to give you a cage for it. You pick it up. You put the tarantula in the box, and it's yours. And James goes, okay, but if I pick it up, if I drop it on the floor, I'm not going to get it. Then the guy gets back on the phone. He's like, I'm not picking that thing up. You're going to have to do something. So he made a deal with him, and he gave him the whole cage and everything. Long story short, he never won me over with that tarantula. That thing was ambushing crickets and stuff, and just the way it would move. And, it's got the big old fangs on it and everything. And he was gone for the summer and selling the house. People come in, the movers were there, they're packing everything up. It's moving to Wisconsin. And the lady that was one of the packers goes, what about that tarantula? What about that rosy-kneed tarantula? And I said, I don't know. Isn't that, what do we do? I guess I have to carry it in my car. And he goes, why, do you like them? And this lady was really into spiders. So I said, I'll sell you that thing, cage and all, for $25. Sold. So I got rid of the tarantula. It never won me over. I could have all the tarantula facts in the world. And the point I'm making is, just because you like a venomous insect, tarantulas are not insects, they're arachnids, I understand, but all the knowledge in the world didn't change my opinion. I don't want them, I don't care about them, I don't want to keep them. Some people don't like bees, they're not going to like bees, they're insects, they don't like anything about them. The way they buzz around, they get in their hair, they're terrified, and these are people that don't even like being out in the country. So you cannot win everyone over. I was very happy when at the new location our son no longer wanted tarantulas. Now he wanted a pet rat, which he trained, and it was just as spooky. But anyway, we're moving on. Know about them, be excited about them, share what's good about them, and then maybe you'll win somebody over. But others, you're just going to have to give up on them. But the more you know. I know a lot about tarantulas. I photographed them. I took photographs of the golden carapace tarantula down in Mexico. I got great pictures of it. Never liked them, never wanted them around, didn't want to take one home in my pocket or anything. You cannot win people over for some species. Question number 8, Johnny Blaylock. I've been enjoying your videos for a while. I want to open feed to stimulate my bees for spring. How often should I put feed out? Every day, once a week, or some other schedule? So here's the thing, just like here, I've tested open feeding. I'm a fan of open feeding, actually. So setting up a feeding station, when do you do it? Obviously not when the nectar flows on, because there's no point. They're going to go after the flowers and the resources in the environment over whatever you might put out. So stop feeding once the nectar flows on and once your honey supers are on, because you don't want any syrups and stuff that you put out there, pro-sweet, sugar syrup, whatever it happens to be. You don't want to put that out at a time when they're building up resources that you might be harvesting for human consumption. So it's early spring. We want to get them as much as we can, as soon as we can. So for me, there's a couple of weeks in there where I can put out Honeybee Healthy and Ultra Bee Dry Pollen Sub. So Honeybee Healthy gets mixed into syrup, and that's just to extend the syrup so it doesn't spoil. And here's the other thing. If it's not going to hit 50 degrees and be sunny, then don't put it out, because other things will learn that it's there and they'll feed on it. So we're talking wasps and hornets. They can fly at lower temperatures. Queens are coming out in spring, and they're starting their wasp nests and their hornet nests, and they need carbohydrates to do it. And then once they have larvae, then they're predators, so now they're getting animal protein for them. So if it's 50 degrees, if it's below 50 degrees, don't put it out at all, I suggest. You can do whatever you want, but I'm just telling you what I've learned. And then the syrups that you put out to feed your bees to boost them, because we want them to get as many resources in as they can, because one of the first things that comes out in spring will be pollen. So often the pollen is produced without an associated nectar flow. So they can get the pollen to build their brood, but without the carbohydrate resource, stored honey, or supplemental feeding that you do in an open feed station. If it's not available, then their production will also be arrested. So in other words, they'll start brood, but it won't be a big pattern of brood that they otherwise would have if you boost the resources. That's why things like Ultra Bee Dry Pollen Sub were developed. It is the most successful, and there are studies to support it, that it works in brood building. So the amino acid profiles, the protein profile, everything else is suited to bees to help them. And it's not pollen, it's a pollen substitute. Not as good as pollen, but better than nothing. Therefore, they'll help your bees kick off early. Now, if you're not interested in kicking your bees off early, you don't need to do it. So if you're just a backyard beekeeper and honey's not your product and you don't count on an immediate buildup, you don't have to do early feeding. I did it as a way to evaluate the feed. So that includes dry and syrup. Now the other thing about the syrup that you put out, and I'm glad we're on this question too. So if you put out sugar syrup in spring, it's 1-to-1 by weight. 1 part sugar, 1 part water, and we're talking about white processed sugar. Now once you mix it up, try to keep it inside and keep it warm until we're at the time when the bees forage. So if the syrup is out there and the syrup is only 50 or 51 degrees, the bees will fly to it, the early ones will. They'll land on it, they'll take in the syrup, and they'll stay there for the longest time because now they have to warm up. They took in cold syrup. But if you put syrup out that is now at 74 degrees Fahrenheit, so you keep it inside, it's at 74 degrees Fahrenheit, then you put that feeder out and you use the same location each time. So when the outside temps are 50 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, foragers will go out and they'll first go to known resources. That's why it's important for you to put out your resources for them in the exact same locations because they're going to scout that spot first. And if it's at least 74 degrees Fahrenheit in your syrup, that means they're going to get 10 or 11 trips to and from the syrup back to the hive, which is 150 feet away from mine. They're going to make multiple trips back and forth, where if the syrup was left out overnight and it's at 50 degrees and they hit that, they're going to make very few runs back and forth to the hive because they're grounded by the cold syrup. I did the practical studies and observations myself. And then, of course, when it gets into the 60s and things like that, sunny days, there'll be more foragers out. And that's when they're scouting new resources. So on colder days, rainy days, damp days, they go to known resources. They don't scout new resources. At least they don't do it in any reasonable numbers. So those are the temperature parameters, and obviously when it's later and starts to get darker, they won't be coming to it, so that's when you take it all in, because we don't need night moths and things like that benefiting from the syrup that you put out there. So not when it's below 50 and not after dark, otherwise put them out, and that helps boost them. So in the LorobBee dry pollen sub that I've tested, they go after that when there are no other resources, so other pollen resources are scarce or non-existent. So early spring, that works for a while, and then you get to a point where they just ignore it. So there's like a 1 or 2 week time frame in there, because this person is also, I think, from Pennsylvania. Anyway, what happens is, as the real pollen comes in, you'll see it'll drop by 70%, the number of bees that are after your dry pollen sub. So the reason I bring that up is if you're a backyard beekeeper, don't bother buying a 50-pound bag of LorobBee dry pollen sub. They sell those buckets, so I buy the buckets. I think they're 10-pound buckets, more than enough for all of my bees in my apiary. So you don't want to stockpile that stuff either. You want to get the fresh batch from that year, because fresh is better when it comes to dry pollen sub and things like that. And of course, what would I put out? Sugar syrup or ProSweet, so to get them going. ProSweet is really dense, so that is the consistency of honey, so be careful about the feeder that you put it in, so it does not have an open surface, so the bees can get stuck in it and drown. And there again, the 1-to-1 syrups, bees can fall into it if it's got open surface on it, and then get out of that and still fly away. If it's the really thick stuff like ProSweet, which is right about 20% water, they get stuck in that, they're really stuck, and then they can drown right there. And if it's cold, it really takes them out. So warmer temperatures for the syrup, thinner syrups, and you can take ProSweet, you can cut it with water that time of year. You don't have to feed it full strength. So I hope that helps. Yep, they fly to the known sources. Question number 9. I can't believe we're already on 9. Seems like time went fast. Maybe it's just me. This is from Rob Alfred, Dalton, Pennsylvania. I've been keeping bees for 6 years. This winter I decided to try out brood minder temperature probes. I'm using the probes in 2 of my hives above the brood. Yesterday, I checked the hive temps, and one hive, very strong, read 59.6 degrees, and the bees are closer to the probe. The other hive, smaller cluster, read 23.9 degrees, and the bees are farther away from the probe. It was 10 degrees outside the hives. 10 degrees outside the hives. Here's my question. When the bees start raising brood, what would be the temperature inside of the cluster? A follow-up question would be, when do they begin raising brood? Okay, so here in Pennsylvania, this person is from Dalton, Pennsylvania. So here in Erie County, Pennsylvania, they're raising brood now. So even though we've had cold weather, snowy, and everything else, although today it's in the 40s, they have brood going. So here, historically, from mid-December on, they're starting to go ahead and raise brood. And that's what those fat-bodied winter bees are for. They are capable of feeding and rearing brood even without a current nectar or pollen flow. So, and they have emergency resources. Of course, they're way ahead if also in that hive they have stored pollen and they have stored honey and everything else. So these are survivor level bees that can go for many months. And then of course, they don't raise a whole bunch of brood. They raise tiny groups of brood until the stimulants that I described early on start to happen. New nectar coming in, new pollen coming in. And that's when those nurse bees get refortified and they're not drawing upon their stored fat and resources. And that's when they actually start to build more brood. They allow the queen to lay more eggs. The queen really is at the mercy of the nurse bees, and in this case, the fat-bodied winter bees. And they allow the queen to lay more eggs that they will attend to. If the queen lays eggs that they don't want around, you guessed it, they eat them. So, with those resources coming in, they will start to produce more brood. The question here is, what's the temperature inside the cluster? Well, we know, and this ties in well to my concerns about people who are just curious and want to open their hive and start pulling frames and looking at their bees because we got some kind of warm-up suddenly. This is a critical time for your bees, and we don't want to chill the brood because a very momentary chill of the brood can reduce their numbers, can damage them, and you won't necessarily know that. But they have to recover from any loss of heat. And of course, when you pull things apart, you have composition, you have the infrastructure that gets damaged. So any waxworks that they've done since last fall, now you're disrupting in order to just find out what's going on. But you can't really change anything unless you're doing some kind of configuration change or you're doing some kind of work with the bees. Please don't go beyond assessing resources, like Mike Palmer up in Vermont. He reaches in, he finds out if there's any honey there, and he sticks his hive tool in. If he pulls out honey, that's it. He walks away, closes it up. There's no looking around at anything. We can't requeen them right now. We can't replace eggs if they don't have any. We can't install new brood if they're broodless. So there's nothing you're going to do reproductively to that colony to help them out. So if it's just out of your own curiosity, please don't pull them apart. Because at the center of that cluster, it is going to be 94 to 97 degrees over the brood. So the nurse bees, there are heater bees in there, and not every bee, every worker is in there heating up the thorax and generating the heat to keep the brood alive. And most beekeepers that have kept bees for any period of time have had a dead out in the spring, and you look at the bees stuffed in the cells on the brood frame, you'll see a whole pattern of bees with their whole body stuck in there and their contracted abdomens because they starved out. Why did they starve out in that cell? And people say because they're in the cell trying to get every last ounce of honey there. Well, not necessarily, because that's a brood frame, and in the middle of the brood frame there wouldn't be any honey that time of year. What would be in there? New larvae. So what would that little worker bee be doing, jammed in that cell, shoulder to shoulder with other bees, other workers also jammed in their adjacent cells, right? What would they be doing? They would be performing a ditch effort to keep the larvae that are in that cell alive. They do that by feeding them. They do that by plugging the hole with their bodies to make sure they're not exposed to the cold, and they generate heat to keep that little larva at 94 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. So, and that's why I've asked people that are, dismantling a hive that died out, and you see that pattern, they're all aiming towards the middle, and it's definitely on a brood frame, and there weren't necessary honey cells there, please take tweezers and pull them out carefully and see if there isn't a little larva right underneath that dead bee. Because that may change the way you look at that. Because when we open a hive and we expose them to any temperatures below those parameters, the bees have to kick in, cover those cells with their bodies, generate heat to keep them at 94 to 97, and to protect them from this sudden exposure because their beekeeper wanted to take a look at them. So I'm encouraging you not to look in on the bees, and that is the temperature, but how do you assess the temperature? Those broodminder strips generally sit on top, so they're not necessarily going to tell you if there's brood present, but they do tell you if your bees are alive. So the question is, what are you going to do with the information? So in other words, if you know that they're alive, is that enough? Because what if they're alive, but there isn't brood? What are you going to do about it? What's your plan? So if you're going to look in there, and now the brood minders are set up so that you read them with your cell phone. So they transmit, they put their data out. So wherever you've put that, so you might have put that in the center, right on the top box, inside the hive, underneath the inner cover, something like that. And so you know that there's a rise in temperature. So if up away from your brood cluster, if you've got these higher temperatures, there's a very good chance. Now, what you'll see is a change. So this is probably the best way to help you out with that. We have a cluster here. We've got a brood minder sensor up here. So one of the advantages, I guess, is to look at the change in temperatures there, right? So in other words, as they build brood, as new brood hatches inside this hive, because they're going to hatch 21 days after they start laying brood. So if they started laying eggs and producing new brood in December, and then we went through January, now we're into February, we should start to see a buildup going on in there. And then with that buildup would come a temperature increase, right? So, and then as spring hits, you'll really see a temperature increase. So now there's a combination of things. One is going to be, some people have the brood minder scales on there, which I'm not a huge fan of. I don't use them, but I'm just going by what people say. But if I knew the physical weight of the hive, as they produce more brood and they start to bring in resources as well, the hive will start to gain weight, and then the temperature will correlate with that. Temperature rising and weight rising means that they're increasing the numbers of the bees. Now, if only weight is increasing inside your hive, but the temperatures are not responding by going higher, they could just be bringing in resources like nectar and not necessarily increasing their numbers. So then you might be able to forecast that I might be losing a colony or something like that. But there again, this time of year, February, what are you going to do about it? Maybe nothing. So what I suggest we do is what we can do. We can pop the cover, we can pull the inner cover. If you've got food underneath of it, like fondant or sugar bricks or whatever you've been providing as emergency feed, the emergency feed is your assessment. That's the beginning and the end of it. Are they consuming the emergency feed? Yes. Do they have enough left? Yeah, leave it. Do they not have enough left? Pull it, swap it. If they're near the end, if they've 90% consumed the resource that's sitting there, pull it and put a new one on, and have that all with you so that you do all of this in one visit to your hive. Pull the outer cover, look at the food. If the food's under the inner cover, pull the inner cover, look at the food. Have your other food ready to go in case that's exhausted. Once you provide it, close it up, put it down, because those colonies that are stronger are going to show a high consumption rate of the food resource as well. So it's a combination of changes that are going on, but these temperatures, we look for a rise in temperature. If you've got a consistent reading through the days and weeks of different temperatures of that cluster, the cluster could be moving up and closer to your sensor and therefore increase it, but you'll see a 24-hour cycle of rising and falling, but those rising and falling temperatures will start to come up more as the colony cluster gets closer to your sensor and they're still alive, and then the increased temperature will show you that they've got a brood increase as well, partnered with physical weight gain on the hive. See? Otherwise, you'll just have to be like the rest of us and see what you have when the temps really get into the 70s. You get those few days that come along, 70, 75, and that's when you can really look at the brood frames. A sunny afternoon, 75 degrees, pull that cover and satisfy your curiosity. because then you're not going to do too much to them. But everything below 94 degrees Fahrenheit is going to cause the bees to make up for the heat loss that you caused. So that's it. And now we're in the fluff section. So we already talked about Valentine's Day. If you haven't taken care of Valentine's, you better get out there and start shopping. You better not get yourself in trouble. Prime starvation is ahead of us. This is where a lot of new and seasoned beekeepers get overly confident. They have sensors maybe that tell them that their bees are alive. They've been listening to the hives. They see cleansing flights. Because that's the next thing that's going to be cool to watch when around here, when we get into the 50s. We'll see more activity, especially a sunny day in the 50s. You're going to see a lot of bees flying. Now, if they're not flying, that doesn't mean they're dead. Please don't autopsy a colony because all the other colonies seem to be flying and this one isn't. So you're curious, you think it's dead, it's time to pull it apart. Please don't do that. You could be the last nail in that coffin. Leave it, because what are you going to do? Nothing. You're not going to do anything. So leave them alone till it really gets warm, because I've done this over the years where I've seen a colony that was showing zero activity, but then the one day it hits 75 or 76, all of a sudden comes to life and it's flying like crazy. It was not dead. They were just conservative, waiting later before they forage, because what's out there for them to get? Nothing yet. What's in it for them to expend their energy? Nothing. So they stayed clustered. They still had resources. Don't open them unless it's time to do that. Keep your entrances clear still. Dead bees can start piling up in those entrances, and you can help them out a lot by clearing those dead bees out. Keep them, give them an opening, help them out. Scoop as many dead bees off that bottom as you can. Get your supers ready, because with the spring buildup that can happen at the end of this month, starting in March, they can start to build up. If you're not ready to put supers on there, the populations can get out of hand in a very short amount of time. Remember, they could be producing as many as 1,500 new bees per day. So that's going to cause the colony to have more workers, more stuff gets done, more expansion. They don't have room to expand, they're going to move out, they're going to create suburbs. That's right. They move out of the city and they're going to create suburbs because the city's too populated. So it's your job to expand with high rises. Give them more places to live. And so have that stuff ready to go with your foundation, with your medium boxes, whatever you're going to do. And now it's time for my shout out today. And this is a good one, by the way. Well, I mean, all shout outs are good. I don't know what I'm saying. So today's shout out, because we have this cold weather, and I have the ProVap 110, and I have the, what's it called? The LorobBee's ProVap. These are both oxalic acid vaporizing units. Now, it's too cold for me to use them, but I have plans to test them. I'm going to test all their parameters coming up, but some people are probably going to be treating for mites earlier than me because they don't live right up here in the northern part of the country. You might be in the south. You might have a mite problem. You might have to treat. So get ready for this, and a link will be down in the video description. I want you to go to that bee man at Faith Apiaries. And he has a very good comparison of the ProVap 110 and the LorobBee's vaporizer unit for oxalic acid. And the guy does a very thorough, very well-reasoned evaluation. He also has done thousands of cycles with his ProVape. So he's got a lot of experience with them, and I highly recommend you go. Please tell him that Frederick Dunn said hello, give him a thumbs up, support another channel, and see what you learn there. If you're at all interested in an oxalic acid vaporizer unit, very informative. And he talks about the economics. He talks about what it costs. Talks about how much time it takes. Why should I tell you the details? Just watch his video. And I want to thank you for being here with me today and spending your valuable time. But be ready. We are about to enter the time of year here in the northeastern United States where a lot of beekeepers lose their bees due to starvation. So have resources on the hives, and on those warmer days, I highly recommend for my backyard beekeepers that you establish a feeding station and that you provide those resources when the temperature parameters reach those that I've described to you today. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend.